Larry Troster, it's so nice to see you here.
It's great to be here.
And we wanted to bring forth from you, with your experience over many years, a sense of what is it in Judaism that we can learn from in terms of views of nature and environmental ethics.
Well, I think first and foremost, if we view the natural world not as something separate from us, but that we are part of what rabbinic Judaism called the Seder Bereshit, the order of creation. We're all part of the same order. And I think this is especially found poetically in Psalm 148, where all of life, all of the inhabitants of heaven, even the weather, even the landscape, are part of a creation choir praising God. So there is, first of all, that sense that we don't stand outside of nature. We are part of the natural world, we're part of creation. We have very similar kinds of bodies as animals. We are all infused with the what the Torah calls the nishmat chaim, the breath of life comes from God. And yet we also have a particular status which, because of certain God-like capabilities, but that gives us a responsibility.
And that responsibility could be stewardship or care for creation. Tell us about the terms that are working for Judaism.
Yeah, I think that stewardship is a good point. I think that Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 has been misinterpreted when it says master creation. Some people translate it as dominion. What it really meant was to be an agent of God, to be a caretaker. I like to often use the term caretaker. That model is that we are supposed to be caretakers. And you see that also in Genesis chapter 2, when the human is put into the Garden of Eden, as it says in one translation, to till it and to tend it, or to work it and to guard it. So we're allowed to utilize creation, but we have to do so in a way that doesn't disrupt the order. And I think that's a very important underlying theology in the Torah and in Judaism. And we have to kind of learn how to balance those things. On the one hand, we can benefit from it. On the other hand, we're not supposed to destroy it. And that finds expression in a law in Deuteronomy that's been interpreted to be a prohibition of wanton destruction and overconsumption.
Yes. And one of the great contributions of Judaism, isn't it, the Sabbath and also the Jubilee year? Can you tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, the Sabbath is itself embedded in creation by God in Genesis 1, and it's also, so it's the idea that it's to celebrate creation, and in imitation of God, which is a very important value, we are to rest. And if you follow the Sabbath, the idea of it is we're supposed to leave creation alone, that during the week we work, we create, we utilize creation, but there's one day a week where we are supposed to leave it be, so to speak, as much as we can. In that respect, human society in some ways is, again, a kind of godlike quality of making and creating and shaping, except on the Sabbath. And the tradition also says, once every 7 years there should be a year which is like that, and every 49 years there are 7 sabbatical years, and then in the 50th year the land has to go back to its own original owners, which very explicitly says, because God is the ultimate owner and we are tenants, we are not owners. And I think that is one of the critical ideas too, that we are not absolute owners, we are tenants, that anything that is our property is only given to us on a temporary basis, and there's a lot of good material for that.
Yeah, and these are such rich images too, aren't they, of the agricultural cycles and so on, and the sacredness of food too. Can you say something about food in Judaism?
The whole Leviticus division of animals all has to do again with this underlying idea that there's a particular order of creation. And originally humans were supposed to be completely vegetarian. I mean, that's what comes out of Genesis 1. It's only after the flood that we are given permission to eat meat. And then in what we call now the kosher laws are limiting again what kind of animals we can eat, because there's this idea that these are fellow creatures and we're not to sort of take them for granted. And I think that's a really interesting point. In fact, it's probably true that originally any animal that was slaughtered for food had to be done in a sacral way, not in a secular way, especially when there were a lot of local shrines. So that has to do with the idea that, in a certain sense, in the perfect world, we shouldn't be doing that. But given that we are doing it, we have to do it in a sense of appreciating that, in a certain sense, we're sharing the world with these creatures.
Yes. So our human role is caretaker, it's respect, it's reverence, it's sharing, and so on. And we're also participating in something divine, aren't we?
Yes, in a certain sense, we're helping to actualize divine power on the earth when we are taking care of creation. That there's a kind of parallelism between, there's the angelic creatures of the heavens and there's the human, and they are the servants of God in the heavens. You see this in biblical texts, and we are the servants of God on earth, and heaven and earth make up all of creation. So we are to praise God like the angels do. We are supposed to work the earth, but do so in a good way. And I think what happens in later Judaism is there's a whole liturgy that develops to, in effect, recognize the divine origin of everything and allow us to express a sense of gratitude, I think is really important, and praise. And that comes in a kind of mindfulness not to take anything for granted, that everything is sacred on a certain level.
Yeah. And so you began some of these studies at Jewish Theological Seminary with Neil Gilman, your teacher.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how did you get involved in this?
Well, it was originally a sort of trying to understand the connection between Judaism and science. But then when I was ordained and I was working in a congregation and talking about these issues with some people who were actively involved in the secular environmental movement, they wanted to see how their tradition fit into this. And to me, it was a very natural segue to do so. That was kind of the intellectual part. I started learning about climate change, and I, as a parent at the time of young children, I was deeply concerned about the future world. And also, I think I realized when I look at my own background, because I grew up in Toronto, and I spent many summers at summer camp in Northern Ontario, I realized that some of my deepest spiritual experiences were in the natural world on canoe trips and things like that. So I looked at that and I said, this is where my spirituality lies as well. And more recently, I think through my work with GreenFaith, I've become aware of environmental injustice. And Judaism has a very strong justice tradition, and I've made it part of my work to connect that with environmental justice, and I think that's very important.
That's wonderful. Just to explore the two things you've just mentioned, a certain amount of Jewish environmentalism is helping the younger generation to go back to nature, right?
Yes.
Farms or summer experiences and doing Torah, but being in nature. And then to pick up on this other part of the environmental justice, can you speak to what does that mean from your tradition?
Well, if you look in the law codes of the Torah in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, especially in Deuteronomy, there is a strong sense of an idea called tzedek. And tzedek is the term usually translated as justice or righteousness, but it has a core meaning of equity. And equity means that under normal circumstances, once we leave the Garden of Eden, the world is a little out of whack, a little out of balance. That order is not quite what it should be. And the understanding is that it's never going to be perfect again until the Messianic age. But in the meantime, there are very specific acts that we can do to bring a little more tzedek in the world. And because I think that the authors of these texts understood that in human society there was a natural move towards a concentration of wealth and power in fewer and fewer people's hands. And so in ethical terms, what this is about is distributive justice. That there should be a certain sense of equitable distribution of wealth and a certain sense of equitable distribution of risk. And you see this also in rabbinic literature on issues of pollution. There's a fascinating rabbinic text on, you've got a place where a lot of people live, and what happens if a guy opens up a workshop? He's making a lot of noise. He can be told you can't do that here. Noise pollution or a tannery or something like that. So there's a real belief in the common good. I think that's also what it's about, our deep belief in the common good.
Yeah, these are magnificent qualities of a tradition that's so old and still so present and relevant. And we thank you, Larry, for summarizing some of these points.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk with you about this.
Your work has been a great contribution.
Thank you.